In 1978, a Bulgarian dissident named Georgy Markov was waiting for a bus on Waterloo Bridge in London. He felt a sharp sting in his thigh, like an insect bite. He turned and saw a man picking up an umbrella. The man apologized and quickly got into a taxi. Markov thought nothing of it. By that evening, he had a fever. 3 days later, he was dead. An autopsy found a tiny platinum pellet embedded in his leg, drilled with microscopic holes that had contained ricin. The umbrella had been a weapon. The sting had been an execution. And the killer was never caught. This is the world Novichok was built for. Not battlefields, not military installations, but bus stops, door handles, perfume bottles, places where ordinary people live ordinary lives, unaware that weapons designed in secret laboratories could reach them at any moment. Markov's assassination was crude by comparison. A mechanical device, a known toxin, physical evidence left behind. Novichok was meant to be better. Invisible to detection equipment, untraceable to any known source. A murder weapon that would turn death into a medical mystery. Decades after its creation, it's still doing exactly what it was designed to do. The invisible arms race. When we think about weapons development during the Cold War, we imagine vast projects. The Manhattan Project, intercontinental ballistic missiles, submarines prowling beneath polar ice. These were weapons of apocalypse, designed to end civilization if deterrence failed. But running parallel to these programs was something quieter, something designed not to prevent war, but to wage it in ways that would never be acknowledged. Chemical weapons had a troubled history. Their use in World War I, chlorine and mustard gas rolling across trenches, had been so horrific that nations agreed to ban them. The Geneva Protocol of 1925 prohibited chemical warfare, but prohibition and elimination are different things. Countries kept their stockpiles. Research continued, and by the 1970s, as new treaties were being negotiated, the Soviet Union faced a problem. The Chemical Weapons Convention was taking shape. It would require signatories to declare their arsenals, to allow inspections, to destroy their stockpiles under international supervision. The Soviet Union couldn't refuse to sign without revealing itself as a rogue state, but it also wasn't willing to give up chemical weapons as a tool. So it chose a third path: develop entirely new agents that wouldn't be covered by existing agreements, substances that didn't appear on any list, compounds that detection equipment wasn't designed to find. This wasn't a defensive program, it was an offensive one disguised as compliance. The Soviets would sign the treaty and simultaneously build weapons the treaty didn't know existed. The program was called Foliant, and its crown jewel would be called Novichok, newcomer in Russian. A fitting name for agents designed to be unknown. The architecture of compartmentalized evil. The facilities where Novichok was developed weren't marked with biohazard symbols or military designations. They had benign names. The State Scientific Research Institute for Organic Chemistry and Technology. Facilities that sounded like they made fertilizer or industrial chemicals. In some cases, they did. The cover was real. The weapons research was hidden within legitimate operations. This wasn't just about fooling foreign intelligence. It was about controlling information domestically. Scientists working on one compound often didn't know what colleagues down the hall were synthesizing. Research was divided into fragments. One team might develop a precursor chemical. Another might work on delivery mechanisms. A third might study toxicology. Only a handful of senior officials saw the complete picture. This compartmentalization served multiple purposes. It prevented leaks. You can't reveal what you don't know. It complicated defection. A scientist who fled to the West could only describe their small piece of the puzzle. But it also diffused moral responsibility. When you're synthesizing a compound whose purpose you don't fully understand, it's easier to rationalize. You're just doing chemistry. Someone else decides how it's used. The scientists involved weren't monsters. They were professionals working within a system that rewarded compliance and punished dissent. Many had families. They wanted career advancement, better apartments, access to goods that ordinary Soviets couldn't obtain. Some genuinely believed they were serving their country's defense. Others knew better but saw no way out. Refusing an assignment from the Soviet military wasn't an option that ended well. But regardless of individual motivations, the collective result was the same. a family of nerve agents more lethal than anything previously created, designed specifically to evade international oversight. How nerve agents destroy the body. To understand what makes Novichok so dangerous, you need to understand the fundamental biology it exploits. Your nervous system operates on chemical signals. When your brain wants your hand to move, it sends an electrical impulse down a nerve. At the end of that nerve, the signal converts to chemistry. A neurotransmitter called acetylcholine is released. It crosses a microscopic gap and binds to receptors on muscle cells. The muscle contracts. Your hand moves, but the signal can't continue forever. If acetylcholine kept binding to receptors, your muscles would lock in permanent contraction. So your body produces an enzyme called acetylcholinesterase. It breaks down acetylcholine, or ending the signal. The muscle relaxes. This cycle repeats constantly, millions of times a day, controlling everything from breathing to blinking. Nerve agents work by blocking acetylcholinesterase. They bind to the enzyme and disable it. Suddenly, acetylcholine accumulates. Signals don't stop. Muscles receive continuous commands to contract. Your pupils constrict to pinpoints. Saliva floods your mouth. You begin to sweat profusely. Muscles twitch and spasm. Your chest tightens as respiratory muscles fail to relax. You can't breathe properly. Consciousness may remain, which makes it worse. You're aware of your body's betrayal, but powerless to stop it. Death, when it comes, is usually from respiratory failure. The diaphragm can't function. Oxygen stops reaching the brain. But the path to that point is agonizing. This isn't a quick poison. It's a systematic shutdown of the body's ability to control itself. Earlier nerve agents like sarin and VX worked this way. Novichok worked the same way, but the molecular engineering made it far more effective at binding to acetylcholinesterase, which meant it was far more lethal. The innovation of invisibility. What made Novichok different wasn't just potency, it was detectability, or rather, the lack of it. Chemical weapons detection in the 1980s relied on known signatures. Equipment was calibrated to recognize specific compounds. Sarin had a particular molecular structure. VX had another. Detectors were programmed to find these patterns. If you encountered a chemical that wasn't in the database, the equipment might not recognize it as dangerous. Novichok exploited this gap. Its molecular structure was deliberately unfamiliar. It wasn't a modification of existing agents. It was a new class of compounds, organophosphates with configurations that hadn't been seen before. Detection equipment would encounter it and potentially classify it as an unknown industrial chemical. Not harmless, perhaps, but not immediately identified as a weapon. This wasn't the only innovation. Novichok agents were designed for binary deployment. The final toxic compound could be mixed from two precursor chemicals that were individually much less dangerous. This had practical advantages. Precursors were easier to store safely, they were less likely to degrade over time, and critically, they were harder to identify as weapons. A shipment of industrial chemicals could contain Novichok precursors without triggering alarms. Only when mixed would they become lethal. The potency was another factor. Reports suggested Novichok agents were 5 to 8 times more toxic than VX, which was already considered the most lethal nerve agent in existence. This meant effective doses could be tiny, milligrams, an amount that could fit on the head of a pin. Such small quantities made deployment easier and detection harder. There was simply less material to find. And then there was persistence. Some Novichok variants were engineered to remain stable in the environment. They didn't break down quickly when exposed to air or moisture. They could linger on surfaces for days, weeks, possibly longer. This wasn't an accident. Persistence extended the danger window. It increased the chance that the target would be exposed, and it created a secondary hazard for anyone who came into contact with contaminated surfaces afterward. The logic of deniable weapons. Traditional weapons have a paradoxical relationship with secrecy. A nuclear weapon's power comes partly from everyone knowing you have it. Deterrence requires visibility, but Novichok operated on different logic. Its power came from ambiguity. When someone is killed with a conventional weapon, attribution is often straightforward. Bullets can be matched to guns. Explosives leave chemical signatures. Manufacturing processes create forensic trails. But when someone is poisoned with a substance that doesn't match any known profile, investigation becomes exponentially harder. Doctors struggle to diagnose. Toxicology screens come back negative. Time passes. The victim may die before the poison is identified. Evidence degrades. Witnesses' memories fade. This ambiguity serves strategic purposes. Even when suspicion points toward a particular actor, proving it is difficult. Accusations can be dismissed as speculation. Show us the evidence becomes an effective defense when the evidence is a compound that isn't supposed to exist. Diplomatic consequences can be minimized. Sanctions can be avoided. The attacker operates in a gray zone where certainty is impossible and doubt is weaponized. This was the doctrine behind Novichok. Not mass casualties, not battlefield superiority. Targeted elimination with built-in deniability. A weapon for operations that would never appear in official records. For enemies who needed to disappear quietly. For sending messages that could be received but never proven. It was assassination as art form. Murder as statecraft. The defector who exposed the secret. For years, Western intelligence suspected the Soviet Union was continuing chemical weapons research despite treaty obligations. But suspicion isn't proof. Then the Soviet Union collapsed. The Cold War ended. And a chemist named Vil Mirzyanov decided the world needed to know what had been created in secret. Mirzyanov had worked within the Soviet chemical weapons program. He had been involved in testing and evaluating agents developed under Folian. He knew about Novichok, its properties, its purpose, its very existence. And in the chaos of the early 1990s, as the Soviet system crumbled, he made a choice that would cost him dearly. In 1992, Mirzyanov published an article in a Russian newspaper revealing the existence of Novichok. He described the program. He named facilities. He explained that Russia had continued developing chemical weapons even while claiming to comply with international agreements. The revelation was explosive. The Russian government's response was swift and harsh. Mirzyanov was arrested and charged with revealing state secrets. His prosecution became an international incident. Western scientists and human rights organizations rallied to his defense, arguing that exposing illegal weapons programs shouldn't be a crime. Eventually, after months of detention, the charges were dropped, but only because the trial itself would have required discussing classified information in open court. Mirzyanov's career was destroyed. His safety in Russia was compromised. He eventually emigrated to the United States, where he continued to speak about Novichok and advocate for chemical weapons elimination. His revelations forced Western governments to take the threat seriously. Intelligence agencies updated their databases. Detection methods were refined. Diplomatic pressure increased. But even with this information, Novichok remained largely theoretical in Western countries. Actual samples were scarce. Chemical structures were partially understood, but not completely verified. It existed in a strange liminal space, known but not fully characterized. A threat that was real but hard to quantify. That changed in 2018. Salisbury, a quiet city, becomes a crime scene. Sergei Skripal had lived in Salisbury for 8 years. He was a former colonel in Russian military intelligence who had spied for Britain's MI6. In 2006, he was arrested in Moscow and convicted of treason. He served 4 years in prison before being released as a part of a spy swap in 2010. Britain gave him asylum. He settled in Salisbury, a cathedral city in southern England, population around 45,000. He lived in a modest house. He went to the gym. He fed ducks at the park. He seemed to have been left alone. On Sunday, March 4, 2018, Skripal and his daughter Yulia, who was visiting from Russia, went shopping and had lunch in Salisbury city center. Around 4 p.m., they were found unconscious on a bench near a shopping mall. Passers-by thought they were drunk or on drugs. Emergency services were called. Paramedics arrived. The two were unresponsive, barely breathing. They were rushed to Salisbury District Hospital. The medical team was puzzled. The symptoms were strange, pupils constricted to pinpoints, excessive salivation, muscle twitching, respiratory distress. It looked like some kind of poisoning, but initial toxicology screens came back negative. The doctors treated supportively, keeping the patients alive with ventilators and intensive care. while trying to determine what had happened. Meanwhile, police began investigating. This wasn't a random medical emergency. Skripal's background made that impossible. He was a former spy convicted of treason in Russia. If this was poisoning, it was likely deliberate. Detectives started retracing the Skripal's movements. Where had they been that day? What had they touched? What had they eaten? And then others started getting sick. The contamination spreads. Detective Sergeant Nick Bailey had been one of the first responders. He'd gone to Skripal's house as part of the investigation. He hadn't touched the Skripals directly, but he'd walked through their home, examining the scene. Within hours, he fell seriously ill with symptoms matching the Skripals. He was hospitalized in critical condition. This changed everything. Whatever had poisoned the Skripals wasn't contained. It was in the environment. It was on surfaces. It was still active. The police investigation became a hazmat operation. Specialists in chemical and biological threats were brought in. Locations the Skripals had visited were cordoned off. The bench where they'd been found, the restaurant where they'd eaten, Skripal's house, all became crime scenes and contamination zones. Samples were collected from multiple sites. Testing began, but identifying the substance took time. It didn't match standard profiles. Specialized laboratories were needed. Advanced analytical techniques were employed. Days passed. The Skripals remained in critical condition, unconscious, on life support. Bailey fought for his life, and investigators worked urgently to determine what they were dealing with. Finally, the results came back. The poison was a Novichok agent, a military-grade nerve agent from a program that officially didn't exist anymore. A weapon that had been deployed on British soil in a civilian area targeting a former spy, but endangering everyone nearby. The British government declared it a matter of national security. Prime Minister Theresa May addressed Parliament. The substance was identified as Novichok. Russia was the only country known to have developed these agents. The conclusion seemed clear. This was a Russian state-sponsored assassination attempt. But the contamination wasn't over. The perfume bottle. On June 30th, 2018, nearly 4 months after the Skripal poisoning, a woman named Dawn Sturgis collapsed at a house in Amesbury, about 8 miles from Salisbury. Her partner, Charlie Rowley, became ill soon after. Both were rushed to the hospital with symptoms identical to the Skripals. Doctors recognized the pattern immediately. Tests confirmed it. Novichok poisoning. Rowley recovered enough to speak with investigators. He told them he'd found a perfume bottle in a park. It was in a sealed box, looked new, seemed like a nice gift. He'd given it to Sturgis. She'd sprayed it on her wrists. Within minutes, she'd felt unwell. By the time paramedics arrived, she was critically ill. Dawn Sturgis died on July 8, 2018. She was 44 years old. She had no connection to espionage or international affairs. She wasn't a target. She was a civilian who happened to pick up a discarded bottle that contained one of the world's most lethal nerve agents. The bottle was eventually recovered and examined. It was a counterfeit Nina Ricci perfume bottle, specially modified. The sprayer had been adapted to dispense Novichok. It was a delivery device disguised as a consumer product. Investigators believe it was used in the attack on Skripal, applied to his door handle, and then discarded by the attackers. For 4 months, it lay somewhere in the Salisbury area, waiting. When Rowley found it, he had no reason to suspect danger. It looked like a perfectly ordinary perfume bottle. This is the nightmare of persistent nerve agents. Once released into the environment, they don't respect boundaries. They don't distinguish between targets and bystanders. They simply wait for contact. And when that contact comes, they do what they were designed to do. The investigation narrows. British investigators worked methodically to trace the attack. Thousands of hours of surveillance footage were reviewed. Travel records were analyzed. Cell phone data was examined. Patterns emerged. 2 men had arrived at Gatwick Airport from Moscow on March 2nd, 2018. They'd traveled to Salisbury on March 3rd, conducting what appeared to be reconnaissance. They'd returned to Salisbury on March 4th, the day of the poisoning. They'd been captured on camera near Skripal's house. Then they'd left Salisbury, returned to London, and flown back to Moscow that evening. In September 2018, British authorities publicly identified the men. They released photographs. They detailed their movements. They named them as Alexander Petrov and Ruslan Boshirov, almost certainly aliases, and they identified them as officers of the GRU, Russia's military intelligence agency. The evidence pointed to a state-sponsored assassination attempt carried out by Russian intelligence operatives on British soil. Russia denied everything. The two men appeared on Russian television, interviewed by a state-controlled network. They claimed they were innocent tourists who'd visited Salisbury to see its famous cathedral. They said the timing was coincidental. The explanation was widely regarded as absurd. Two Russian men making multiple trips to a small English city just to see a cathedral, arriving and leaving within hours, on the exact day a former Russian spy was poisoned with a Russian nerve agent. But absurdity wasn't the point. The point was to maintain official deniability, to create an alternative narrative, no matter how implausible, to avoid admission, because admission would require consequences, and consequences were what the entire operation had been designed to avoid. This is the doctrine of Novichok in practice. Even when caught, even when evidence is overwhelming, deny everything. The weapon was built for deniability. Use it accordingly. The aftermath. Decontaminating Salisbury took over a year and cost tens of millions of pounds. Specialists had to identify every surface the Skripals had touched, every location they'd visited, every object that might harbor traces of Novichok. Some items were incinerated at high temperatures. Others were sealed in specialized containers and buried. Buildings were stripped to their frames. Soil was excavated. The process was painstaking and expensive, but the economic cost was secondary. The human cost was harder to calculate. Residents lived with uncertainty for months. Was their neighborhood safe? Could there still be contaminated items lying around? Parents worried about children playing in parks. Business owners watched their customer base evaporate as people avoided the city center. The psychological impact rippled outward, affecting thousands who were never physically exposed to the agent. Sergei and Yulia Skripal survived, though their recovery took months. They were released from the hospital and relocated under new identities. Detective Sergeant Bailey also recovered, though he described lasting health effects. Dawn Sturgis was the only fatality directly attributed to the Novichok, but she represents the weapon's most fundamental danger. Collateral damage is inevitable when you deploy persistent nerve agents in civilian areas. The geopolitical consequences were significant but limited. Britain expelled Russian diplomats. Allies followed suit. Sanctions were imposed. Russia was condemned in international forums. But there was no military response, no fundamental change in relations. The consequences, while real, were calibrated to avoid escalation, which meant they were survivable for Russia, which meant, from a strategic perspective, the operation achieved something. A message was sent to defectors and dissidents. You're never safe. We can reach you anywhere, and the consequences we face won't stop us. The lesson of invisible weapons. Novichok was built on a premise that weapons could be made invisible, that attacks could be untraceable, that murder could evade accountability. Salisbury tested that premise, and the results were mixed. The attack wasn't invisible, it was discovered. The agent was identified. The perpetrators were tracked and named. In that sense, the invisibility failed. Modern forensics, surveillance technology, and international cooperation made attribution possible, but accountability remained elusive. The suspects were never arrested. They remain in Russia, protected by a state that denies their involvement. No one has faced trial, no one has been punished. The weapon worked as designed in that crucial respect. Consequences were avoided, and the knowledge of how to make Novichok can't be destroyed. It exists in scientific literature, in leaked documents, in the minds of chemists who worked on the program. Once invented, a weapon can't be uninvented. The formulas exist. The techniques are known. Future actors with sufficient resources and intent could produce Novichok variants. The threat persists because the knowledge persists. This is the enduring danger of invisible weapons. They're not just physical objects that can be destroyed. They're information. And information, once released, can't be contained. We live now in a world where Novichok is a known threat, where nerve agents can be disguised as perfume, where door handles can be murder weapons. That knowledge changes the landscape of security permanently. The question isn't whether Novichok will be used again. The question is whether the world will impose costs severe enough to deter its use. And based on Salisbury, the answer remains uncertain.